What's up, everybody? We have a pretty green day today. Looking at TradingView's heat map, you could see that we've got mostly green across the board. The Bitcoin miners are doing good so far. Who knows how the day ends? Keep in mind, we do have the FOMC today. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about some developments on a state level for Bitcoin. And we're going to talk about some big XRP news. First off, we have North Carolina looking at a Bitcoin strategic reserve, calling for an allocation of 10% of public funds towards Bitcoin as part of a financial innovation strategy. They don't want to get left in the dust. And this Senate Bill 327, was introduced by Todd Johnson, Brad Overcash, interesting name, Timothy Moffitt, fantastic name. The bill envisions Bitcoin investment as a financial innovation strategy to strengthen North Carolina's economic standing. This bill also introduces a HODL strategy, enforcing strict controls on the use of the Bitcoin, limiting selling only to instances of severe financial crisis, and if they were to sell, it requires approval from 2/3 of their General Assembly. This bill also includes the possibility for the state to mine their own Bitcoin, citing it as a way to increase the state's holdings at an even lower cost. This bill also would allow and authorize the state treasurer to engage in Bitcoin-backed investment strategies, staking, lending, generating yield. And it's not just a bill from a Senate level, but we also have a House bill as well. HB or House Bill 92 also proposes a 10% of public funds and retirement systems into these exchange-traded products. We also have some news from the beautiful state of Minnesota. Minnesota senator proposes a Bitcoin Act after going from skeptic to believer. Senator Jeremy Miller introduced the Bitcoin Minnesota Act, I don't know why I said that backwards, completely changing his stance on Bitcoin. As I do more research on cryptocurrency and hear from more and more constituents, I've gone from being highly skeptical to learning more about it to believing in Bitcoin and other currencies, the typical route. Miller says this bill aims to promote prosperity for Minnesotans by allowing the Minnesota State Board of Investment to invest state assets in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And under this Minnesota bill, state employees would be able to add Bitcoin and other cryptos to their retirement accounts. It would also give residents the option to pay state taxes and fees with Bitcoin, which is already something accepted in Utah and Colorado. It's also proposed that investment gains from Bitcoin and other crypto would be exempt from state income taxes. I also want to touch on this article mentioning the FOMC and possibly easing concerns over inflation. And as we talked about recently, CPI, PPI, PCE have all been trending down after recently a period of them rising. So we're essentially where we were only like 2 to 3 months ago. But the positive is we started to get that trend down again. My suspicion is that the Fed will want to see this continue down before making any moves on interest rates. Marcus Thielen, the CEO of 10x Research, believes that because of prices being so oversold, we can see a counter trend rally, stating that there's a good chance that the Fed is mildly dovish. He believes that investor confidence may be improving. We also have an interesting comment about tariffs. Powell expressed doubts about the sustained inflationary impact of tariffs, referencing the 2019 scenario where tariff-related inflation was temporary, and the Fed eventually cut rates 3 times. Now, while it's basically completely expected and accepted at this point that we're not going to get a cut this meeting, we are still potentially looking at some cuts this year, with the first cut starting in the June meeting. Now, going all the way to the end of the year, you'll see that we are anticipating 2 cuts. This is where we currently are, and this is the most likely outcome. Only days ago, it feels like, I think it was only days ago, this was more likely to be the outcome, or they are much more neck and neck at the very least. As we continue to get through different inflation reads as the months progress, we will likely jump from around 3 cuts to 2 cuts to maybe even 1 cuts depending on upcoming data, depending on how tariffs affect the economy, depending on where unemployment goes. There are many moving parts. Now, we do have some fantastic news coming from XRP. According to Brad Garlinghouse, Ripple's CEO, the SEC has dropped the case against Ripple. Now, from what I'm seeing, this is just from the words of Brad Garlinghouse, the CEO of XRP or Ripple. I would personally believe his statement to be true. We have seen the SEC dropped cases left and right as of recently. They dropped the Uniswap case, they dropped the Coinbase case, they dropped the Robinhood case. I'm sure there are others that aren't coming to mind, but I would assume and I would believe Brad Garlinghouse to be correct. I guess this is a good time to segue into something I said the other day. How Michael Saylor sees Bitcoin going to 440K. Well, that was actually a parody account, and I can't find the article now that was going over it. And I can't find the article now going over. It was probably deleted. This is a good time to remind you and to remind myself to always verify. Always double check everything. Sometimes I'm on a very limited time schedule. I only have an hour to prepare my video, an hour to edit. So I'm definitely going to make oversights, but the point still stands. If you hear someone saying Bitcoin's going to go to 440K, what market cap does that place it at? Is that realistic? Just like you might have some insane bears saying Bitcoin's going to go to 10K, you also have some insane bulls saying Bitcoin's going to go to $1 million this cycle, go to 440K this cycle, for instance. So while I was wrong to bring up that article, as if Michael Saylor said it, I apologize for that, but my point still stands. A 440K Bitcoin is very unlikely this cycle, and regardless of who says it, whether it's Michael Saylor, whether it's Larry Fink himself, or whether it's a parody account, why does this keep turning on? The point is, I don't know, I guess do your research or something. Now moving on from my half-assed apology, oh my god, are you kidding me? Now moving on from my half-assed apology, you can see that you can see that Ripple is trying to break out of this descending resistance. We have seen this in the past. We didn't get a candle to close out of it, and we fell back in. I would like to see a candle close out of this descending resistance, and for us to hold over the 50 MA, which seems to be a resistance as well. I urge you to please find me a more bullish altcoin chart. You'd probably have to go quite down the list to find one. XRP, in my eyes, is very bullish compared to many alts that have dropped, 70-80%. XRP is still relatively close to its previous highs. And as I've said the other day, we're still consolidating between two previous cycle peaks. Seems like we're getting a good reaction out of that bullish divergence. The RSI was rising while the price was still selling off, and this was on the daily, and we are getting a little pop combined with this positive news, and we're seeing a nice rally from that point, from that low of 195. We're now sitting at 255. Now, it's not just a coincidence that XRP pretty much stopped in its tracks right here. This is also a major resistance. We have seen this as a resistance before many times, and attempting to be a support until it falls off and we see a reaction on it. We need to hold this roughly 250 area. There's a psychological support. If we can hold that, we can try to take out these previous highs, such as 260 area, such as the infamous 3. If XRP doesn't just keep blasting off from here, that's okay. I'd like to see it establish some support above this resistance, flip it as a support, and then we can go on to take our next levels out. Bitcoin's having a pretty decent day too, not as great as XRP, but still an okay day nonetheless so far. I'll be cautious considering the FOMC. This could definitely be a fake out, and then we drop tomorrow, depending on what we get from Fed Powell. Is he dovish? Is he hawkish? Who knows? But yeah, Bitcoin is trying to reclaim its 200 on the daily. And I want to show you something very interesting that's on the weekly chart. You could see the 50 MA on the weekly. This in the past, such as the Mt. Gox sphere when we dropped all the way to 49K, this was a support, this 50 MA. And we did bounce off it back here in early March. So keep an eye on the 50 MA. I think it is a pretty important level. And in the past, in the last cycle, the 2020 halving cycle, we did see a hold of the 50 MA before we broke it, and it became resistance. It was an important level to watch, an important indicator to watch, I should say. We need to hold this 50 MA. I do think it'll be important to keep an eye on. But you have so many people saying the cycle is over here. Were they saying the same thing here? Most of them probably were. And considering that this was not only a longer drop in terms of the amount of time, but there's also a harder drop, 33% down basically, over multiple months compared to about 30% down in a shorter time frame. This is not as bad of a drop and as long of a time period as we saw late 2024. I feel like this is slipping people's minds already. It's just distant history. No one cares anymore. We saw a worse and longer drop here before recovering and going higher. Why do you expect this to be any different? Just because of some red, because of some pullback? We've seen this before with Bitcoin. Now, if you think Bitcoin won't do good in a recession, which is reasonable, I also think it probably won't do good, then that's reasonable to think. Because of how we have traded against the 50 MA on the weekly in the past, I do think it will be an important level that we hold. So far, so good. Also, I wanted to show you an uptrend that we've been following basically since the beginning of the cycle, when we were only $15,000 per Bitcoin. This ascending support here, keep an eye on it. I think it's important as well. This is the general direction we're going. And it still is, as long as we get a bounce soon, but that's what we need, a bounce soon. If we keep dropping, what are you going to do? Do you have a plan? Are you going to sell down here and wait for hopefully lower prices in 2026, 2027? Or are you going to adjust your timelines? Are you going to adjust your strategy if Bitcoin diverges from the 4-year cycle? While I don't expect to be a buyer in late 2025, if Bitcoin does crash in a recession, if Bitcoin does pull back, I do think it's a good time to reassess. It would be pretty stupid to be stubborn and say, well, Bitcoin follows its cycle, but 2025 is just down. I guess I'm just going to sell and rebuy in 2026. you have to consider, what if the cycle has changed? While I don't think that it has yet, while I think we will go higher this year, what if we don't? Do you have a plan? Are you going to change your plan of being a seller late 2025 to being a buyer if we do drop? Things to think about as we approach potentially a recession. Things to think about as we debate whether the Fed will or won't achieve a soft landing. But what say you? Do you think we're still going to follow the cycle? We have no reason to expect otherwise still at this point. And are you going to adjust your plan if Bitcoin keeps dropping, if Bitcoin somehow goes down to 50K, if Bitcoin just keeps selling off, when from a cycle standpoint we should top out in late 2025? What if that doesn't happen? What do we do then? I'll tell you what I will do is I'll push my stubbornness aside. I'll admit that I was wrong, and I may become a buyer in 2025 if prices actually get low. But anyways, let me know what you guys think of the 4-year cycle. Do you think this is the first time in history that we have broken it? History is still on the bull side. I think 150K is still a reasonable target. Bitcoin can go from this to this very quickly. Bitcoin can go from max fear, max panic to max greed, max euphoria in the flip of a switch. And we still have a heck of a lot of 2025 to still get through. But thanks as always for watching, guys. What do you think we're going to get from the Fed? Is the Fed going to be dovish or hawkish? How are you feeling about Bitcoin? Do we continue to recover from here, or do we start breaking important indicators, breaking important trend lines, and selling off even more? And how do you feel about the economy? Do you think we're going to see a recession in 2025? Do you think we're going to see inflation tick back up, making the Fed's soft landing narrative only that, a narrative? But anyways, thanks as always for watching, guys. How do you feel about this Ripple news? This is pretty big XRP news. We clearly have a more accepting SEC, willing to let go or give up from past transgression, willing to let go or give up from past transgression, willing to let go or pass up previous transgressions. But anyways, thanks as always for watching, guys. I appreciate you, and I'll see you on the next one.